Namaste. I have an exciting episode describing the positions of Romila Thapar concerning public intellectuals and my reflections on her positions. She thinks that public intellectuals were far better during her era than they are now. For instance, now she thinks their critical thinking skills have declined.
Is critical thinking in India somehow under threat? The ease with which the middle class buys into hero worship, cult of personality, excessive valorization of the nation. These are all very much part of present-day India.
Let me just say that I think, I've been disturbed, like all of us have been disturbed, by not just what has been happening in our country, but the worldwide thing, and the election of Trump was certainly a startling wake-up call, as it were. And I think it does raise a couple of questions which need to be answered, which is that why are we losing the sense of critical inquiry that we always appreciated and held?
Romila Thapar seems to be limited in her perspective to a leftist Indian cocoon, how the Indian intellectuals think. She doesn't realize that the comment she made is sort of a worldwide phenomena and not something that Indians particularly are vulnerable to. Notice that she blames the education system for what's happening. I agree with that, but she does not want to blame her political regime, which for several decades after independence did nothing about the education system. Watch.
How many people ask the question of what are you actually teaching the child? You're giving the child information. You're expecting the child to repeat that information. And all this business about objective questions and this, that, and the other is really the old catechismic style of you're given a determined question, a predetermined question, you're given a predetermined answer, and that's what you produce. Now, for me, the essential qualifier in any kind of educational system is teaching a child to think critically, to ask questions. We're not doing that.
What exactly does she think would qualify someone to be a public intellectual? Let's see.
The public intellectual is a person who is in a profession, first of all. It's a professional person. It's a person who is respected in his or her profession. It's not just anybody, it's not just any journalist, but it's a journalist who has a reputation as being good. Or, a social scientist, or a scientist for that matter. It's somebody who is respected. The person is respected for the fact that the knowledge that he tries to convey to the public is reliable knowledge. It's not fantasy. He's not just getting up and spouting, but he knows what he's talking about.
According to her, the main credentials are reputation, prestige, who is popular. Well, that's very subjective. When she was popular, her cabal was popular, they had great reputation, they were having a good time. But now that they're out of favor, they don't consider the same to apply to her successes.
I think it's terribly important that a person like that must have a sense of ethics. And that is something that we're rapidly losing, both in the practice of politics, in the practice of governance, in the practice of education, and so on. The bringing back of not saying this is good and this is bad and you have to be moral about this or moral about that, but the sense of asking the question each time, is this ethical or not?
She's criticizing the ethics of today's public intellectuals, but during her time, she and her colleagues who were manning the gates of power did not criticize corruption because they were beneficiaries to that. They were closed-minded. They did not welcome opposing points of view. So now she's come up with this sermon, lecturing today's public intellectuals, not realizing and perhaps not self-conscious that she was guilty of all these things earlier on.
And finally, and very importantly, the public intellectual is there to protect the rights and the obligations of the citizen. And that protection, I think, is really fundamental, especially in situations where people get by with all kinds of gimmickries. People get by with all kinds of dishonesties.
Romila Thapar did not introspect in this critical manner earlier on when she and her colleagues were very much involved in academic Hindu phobia. Temples were under control of the government and they never protested. The same cabal helped Western Indologists come up with many biases. There were asymmetries in the way things were represented. So a whole lot of academic misuse of power was going on, but she was not bothered at that time. The journalist and Professor Thapar now start blaming social media for all these problems.
Today, the government or the people in authority seem to have successfully mobilized a section of the media to actually assist them in the attack on university autonomy, the attack on critical thinking, the attack on just differences of opinion. I mean, a bunch of kids shouting slogans or a professor videotaped giving a lecture and clips of that being shown and public sentiment being incited that, oh, look at what our universities are up to. This is really something new and very, very dangerous.
Well, I think it's the use of media now not to communicate and not to communicate the reality, but to propagate ideology.
Under the previous leftist Raj, they were completely intolerant of voices like me. Now you would think that having recording devices in class would be something the liberals would propagate because there should be more freedom. But she's not propagating that, she's afraid of that. So what has happened is the power has shifted from one group to another group. She seems to imply that in her era there wasn't bias, there wasn't ideological bias, and only now this kind of a thing has creeped in.
Two channels, important channels, invited me. We fixed the day and the time, and then I was rung up and told, we're very sorry, we're not given permission.
Right.
And I thought to myself that if for a simple interview of 10 minutes you have to take permission from Jo Upar Baitha Hai, then really where is the autonomy of the media?
Right.
I have personally experienced far worse biases than the example she gives. Many times my appointments, interviews have been cancelled, and you know, it's very clear that the media continues to be owned by people with vested interests. These are business houses protecting their business interests. They are aligned with politicians. They use media to blackmail, to propagate what is in their best interest. Media has never been independent in India, but she makes it look like this is a recent problem.
Not just the Prime Minister or the BJP or the RSS, but the whole wider Sangh Parivar has latched on to the idea of the nation and the nation under threat as being a far more potent vehicle for their kind of politics. Then, of course, the entire discourse over terrorism, the so-called surgical strikes, even the campaign against black money, is all being cast in the language of nation khatre mein hai, the nation is in danger. You have TV channels now. I don't recall earlier referring to every dead soldier as a martyr, but you know, every channel now says, you know, soldiers were martyrs.
It is clear from this that the Indian left is out of touch with global dynamics and global discourse. Patriotism has been in for a long time. All over the world, patriotism is coming on stronger than ever. In the United States, ideas like American exceptionalism are accepted from the left to the right, from people like Obama and Jimmy Carter, who were very liberal presidents. They propagated American exceptionalism all the way to the Christian right. So it's not something like nationalism and patriotism is some kind of a uniquely Indian problem. In the United States, the military is held in very high regard, as it should be. But this is considered very strange for the Indian leftists when they find Indian people wanting to be patriotic towards their military. Indians are simply catching up with global trends by being more patriotic. Romila Thapar and her group are nervous that their Breaking India projects and alliances are being exposed, and they are feeling insecure as a result. Here is Professor Thapar's definition of good nationalism and why we Hindus are biased.
a general nationalism of a nation brings all the communities together, gives them a new identity as a citizen, and the new identity is the equality of everybody, equal rights to social justice and the law, equal rights to resources, distribution, and so on. Human rights are guaranteed in the course of being a citizen. But what happens in the case of varieties of nationalism is, whether it's religious or caste or linguistic, that particular group is to be given priority. And so in the Hindu Rashtra, you have, as has been amply written about extensively, you have the Hindu citizen being a notch higher because he has the territory of British India as his Pitri Bhumi and as his Punya Bhumi.
To use Savarkar's famous phrase.
Thesis, yes, and that is really what the whole BJP, Sangh Parivar, RSS thesis is based on. Now, there is therefore a contradiction here, a tension between what many of us understand as nationalism, as such, and what they understand by nationalism, which is Hindu nationalism. It's not the same thing at all.
There are several issues with Professor Thapar's statement. She ignores the very strong anti-majoritarianism trend in the country. She ignores that Indira Gandhi started this Garibi Hatao claim to remove poverty, totally a fraudulent thing, and also abused caste politics made it worse. In the past 70 years after independence, all governments have failed to educate the Indian masses, and Romila Thapar does not take that into account. Professor Thapar does not want to discuss her allegiance to foreign nexuses because these are the forces that are subverting a lot of discourse. Professor Thapar's treatment of this topic misses many important things. The history of Indian science and technology is a huge topic being ignored. Historians like Professor Thapar have not studied India's positive contributions to world civilization. Our researchers need to study other great civilizations of the world through our lens and not just rely on the Western studies of these civilizations. Indian historians should stop selecting and focusing on colonial topics like caste and human rights problems. Finally, we should stop relying exclusively on Western models of social sciences to study Indian society. It is high time we developed our own social thought. In closing, I just want to restate that I mean no disrespect. Professor Thapar has had an eminent career. She's worked very hard, done a lot of good work. I just wanted to bring out issues where I think there's a need for better discussion and debate with her work. I would love to have Professor Thapar and I in conversation on camera. I would love to do it in an amicable way so we get to understand and go back and forth exchanging ideas. Right now we have two monologues. She talks her points of view to her audience and people like me give a response to our audience. But we should sit down and get to know each other in a friendly way, see where we can agree, where we disagree. It'll be good for everybody. Thank you for watching. You can subscribe here and also hit the bell icon to make sure you get notified. To donate, please click this button.